Hello and welcome back to IASA's Virtual Leadership Series. My name is Darin Reffitt. I'm the VP of eLearning with IASA and the Director of Product Marketing Excellence with Guidewire Software. I'm joined again today by Kerry Crockett, IASA's Executive Director, and Cathy Ellwood, the founder of Ellwood Enterprises. And today we're going to be talking about trust, learning to delegate, empower, and verify. So let's start right away, Cathy, by talking about trust and delegation. Why is this such a difficult topic, and why did we choose this as one of the topics for the series?
Boy, I wish I could answer the question on why it's so difficult. I really can't, but I can share with you it's probably one of the most difficult struggles managers have. And I don't know why. They struggle with it whether they're working virtually or whether they're working with it in an office, even if they're located right in the same area. I believe it's a lot more difficult in a virtual world. But the fact is, and it really doesn't matter why it's difficult, it's really important now that it's done well. Because what happens is too often managers, they think they're delegating, but in reality, they're abdicating. And when you abdicate, you're not going to get what you need done.
That is a great perspective. I will share, this is an area that I think I have struggled with the most in my career. As an individual contributor, I feel responsible for everything. So letting go of things and trusting other people to get them done has always been a bit of a struggle for me. So let me turn it over to you, Kerry. Thinking of people like me who are in our audience who maybe struggle with this, why is delegation so hard for leaders?
I think it really comes down to a basic emotion, which is trust, or I should say a lack of that emotion. I mean, we all have our own baggage that we come into life with. And I think sometimes trust issues are one of those things that really prevents us from being good delegators. I think additionally, it's hard to do it effectively. And I think if you're not really sure how to do it, that really limits you in terms of how you're going to be able to delegate to your team. Another piece of that is control. We all have sort of ownership and control over different projects or processes or how we do the job or how we want things done in a certain way. And I think giving up some of that control can be very difficult, especially if as leaders you've been placed in that position for so long. It's hard. I think another reason is it's really hard sometimes, if you don't trust your staff, if you sort of haven't given them that opportunity to sort of spread their wings and try. And it's hard. You want them to make the same decisions that you would make, and that's not necessarily always the case. And so it's hard if you don't really trust your team or have given them that chance to earn that trust either. And I think finally, it's tough because, nobody really wants to be a failure at their job. And if they have delegated something that was really important, for example, and they feel like it wasn't done well, it's a poor reflection on them.
It definitely can make or break your career. And I think that's why creating a strong team and hiring effectively is so important.
Yeah.
So Cathy, now that most organizations are working remotely, or at least I heard a statistic the other day that the number of businesses working remotely is at 34%, and the percentage of employees that could work remotely is 34%. So we've effectively taken anyone who can not be in a workplace and put them in their home at this point. Why do you think that delegation is even harder at this point than it has been historically?
Well, there are all kinds of reasons. So one of the things I think happens is we don't give enough context. We don't explain the why are we doing this? What is the vision for what we're trying to do? How does it link to strategy? What's the context behind it? The other thing I think in a virtual world that's really important is that we need to be very specific. We need to be specific about the boundaries. And with managers sometimes can be a little bit narcissistic. So, like what happens, and Darin, you were nodding your head, like listening. And so you're nodding at like, yes. And what happens with our staff is we think when they nod their head that they get what we're saying, when in fact they're just acknowledging what we have said. They may not really understand it. And this is really important in different cultures because sometimes they'll acknowledge what you say with the words yes. Yes, yes. The other thing, it's one-way communication. So the person will tell you what to do, but yet they don't confirm that what they've told you is actually understood and validated. And it's not as easy to get help. You know, you're not able to ask somebody sitting next to you, um, do you know what she just said? Did you hear what she said? Are you sure? And then, you know, obviously the lack of control and follow-ups, you know, not having the opportunity to really make sure that everything is completed or that you followed up effectively, maybe the way that you would if you were doing it in a in-office space.
I hadn't even considered the diversity and inclusion angle on this. You know, I read a really amazing article about contracts recently and how negotiation and contracts are so different around the world, where in some countries you'll throw out an idea and they'll agree to it, and then when they get a contract they're like, well, no, that was just the starting point. And we as Americans are like, no, that's a contract, that's a done deal. And it talked about that very issue where people will nod and say yes, and what they really are saying is, okay, I heard you. So I don't happen to have any employees who are from another culture at this time, but I'd never thought about how much more challenging that could be as an issue in delegation. Um, so why is effective delegation, Kerry, so important for teams? Why should this be one of our biggest priorities, and why have we been building up to this as one of our topics?
Well, I think first it really gives the opportunity to, allow you to empower your team, let them make some decisions on their own, build that trust among your team, and not only between you and your team members, but between team members within a working project. It allows them to see how they're able to grow and really further their professional development. So I think it's really important to make sure that as you're delegating these tasks, you're paying attention to those types of traits, and let people really spread their wings and grow, and then be able to reap those benefits from that process. I think from the leadership standpoint, it really gives you an opportunity to see how well your team is doing, and really sort of see who's best suited to take on different projects, what their skill sets are, what their strengths are, so that the next project that comes down, you're able to delegate specifically in terms of who you're going to assign a task to. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but it's really important, I think, for leaders to be able to have a handle on that and sort of monitor what's going on so that they know who to delegate to in the future.
You know what? I want to build on that one because I will never forget one time I had hired a brand new project manager, and she was, I would say, maybe 30 years old at the time. And we were hosting a bunch of undergraduates and MBAs to try to recruit them to come to Nationwide Insurance. And we were trying to figure out an event that would actually be appealing to them. And so I said, well, why don't you go ahead and just take care of it? And she said, well, do you care what I do? And I'm like, yeah, I really do. But I thought I'm going to empower, and I'm going to give her a budget and the date and just let her go. And she said, are you sure? And I said, I'm biting my tongue, gritting my teeth. And I said, yes. Well, guess what she did? She wound up making arrangements at the Buckeye, Ohio, the place where the Ohio State Buckeyes play football. We hosted a party there, had their names blasted at the stadium. I could have never pulled that off. I mean, it was the coolest event. She was able to make that happen. And why? Because I set the boundaries. And it really taught me something. First, I trusted her. It proved to her that I respected her. And she really was able to do more way beyond my wildest imagination. So I just think that there's benefit to be gained, but it wasn't easy for me. I had to be willing to let go. I had to be willing to fail, and I had to be willing to give her a chance to prove herself. And she didn't have to have all of my experience. So it really does work.
I mean, it's so powerful when you have that experience. I do agree with the idea of setting boundaries, though. I think boundaries are so important in ensuring that you're at least, when we play football, what you do on the field, there's some rules around, but you know where out of bounds is. And doing that with delegation just really sets the right tone so that people know what's in play. One of the great things that our CEO talks about, Mike Rosenbaum, is when he was on a submarine, they had this approach to how to do your job, which was shipmate, self. And what that referred to is do what's best for the ship, do what's best for your shipmates, and then worry about yourself. And you're never gonna, cause the sub to sink, right? And our company, he's really driving that through the culture of this. As long as we all know we're not going to sink the ship, and we're not going to jeopardize anything, then let's try new things. Let's reinvent things within the confines of what we're allowed to do. And it sets you free while also ensuring that you don't have to worry about what's going to happen once you're set free. So that was a little rambly, but Kerry, let's turn to how can we turn this around? If there are issues with delegation and people are struggling even more now, how do we turn that around in this time so that if and when we're back in the office, we're even better delegators than when we left?
Yeah. Well, and Kathy just mentioned it in her wonderful example. And the first one is learn to let go. It's really hard for us to relinquish some of that ownership, but it's the key thing in being able to delegate effectively. And that's taking that deep breath and just sort of said, I have to let this go. Nothing we do is life and death, and it's not going to ruin everything if I let this piece go and let somebody else learn from it. So that's the first piece. I think with that, you have to really establish sort of a firm priority system within that. So, for example, if you have a list of different projects or tasks, sort of prioritize those for yourself. And if those that have the highest priority, you might want to keep those for yourself and make sure that those do get done because they might have higher stakes that are attached to them. Those that might be a little bit less or lower on that priority list, start by delegating some of those and maybe build yourself up to things that are on a higher priority list as you're building that trust within your team and you're able to see how they're able to respond to what you're giving them. And I think the third piece in that is you want to make sure that you're playing to your team's strengths. So assign those tasks to somebody whose skill sets will align with that project or with that task, and then watch them grow and see how well they're able to do. And that's going to reinforce what you already started.
I totally agree with what you're saying. Sometimes, though, I think that we as managers don't think about the resources. We don't think about the resources that a person is going to need to do whatever we're delegating to them. And we need to be mindful of communicating what their boundaries are. Here's what you have in terms of money. Here's what you have in terms of resources like people you can go to, the time that we need. These are my expectations in terms of quality, time, cost, and instructions. How do you want this done? When do you want it done by? The other thing I think is really important is that we share with people the opportunity to learn. You'd mentioned always give people the opportunity to do something that matters, and you want to make sure that you keep the highest priority to yourself. Well, maybe they shadow you so they can learn too. I'm of the mindset that sometimes it's hard to do, but sometimes you let them do that most important job and you give them that chance to learn and grow. But then you've got to make sure that you've got the right controls in place. So, I've worked with accountants for many years, and one of the things that I love best about working with them is they have this saying, trust but verify. Trust but verify. Trust that they're executing, have the right controls in place, not so you micromanage, but so you can check up on them, so you can see that they're getting the resources that they need to do their job and that things aren't falling through the cracks. And when you start to build trust and you see that people are doing their jobs, you're going to learn to give them more. But this is a two-way street. And I don't want to leave here without talking about this virtually. Trust is a two-way street. It's about the leader trusting you, but it's also about you delivering. If you're running late, communicate. If you're not going to get that project done on time, communicate. Not the day it's due. Communicate well in advance, because a lot of times your manager may be depending upon you to complete that assignment so they can give it to their boss. And if you don't know that, then you're going to look like you're not capable of being trusted. And I really think it's important that you understand why the work that you're doing matters. Take the time when you're asking, when you're getting a new assignment, to ask, how is it going to be used? You know, it's not just about being delegated to, it's about creating space so you can take on additional responsibilities. And it means communicating, asking questions, clarifying boundaries. It's not just your manager's job to tell you, it's also your responsibility to ask.
Yeah, and I would just sort of piggyback on that communication theme. When you've done this process of the delegation and you're so afraid of it, use that opportunity when it's over to communicate back and forth with each other on how you felt that process went. You know, utilize feedback. You know, don't be afraid to take that criticism as well, or take that feedback from your team. So as you're asking them, how do you think it went? Did you feel like you had the right tools and resources and instruction and time to do all the things that I've asked you to do with this project? Don't be afraid to ask them how they felt it went in terms of what you delivered to them. So be accepting of that. It's going to only help you grow. It's going to help your teammate grow. And it's going to instill that trust that you're starting, and you're building on that trust with them.
All of that sounds wonderful. I think that's all great information for our teams to use. Cathy, I really love that you brought up the issue of alerting your boss if you're not going to deliver on time. I had a situation very early in my career, gosh, going back almost 20 years now, where I had an employee who was working on a very highly visible project, and she had to go home. She had children, which the family I totally understood. But there was a project due by the end of the day, and she walked in my office at 5:30 and was like, "I need to get home. I'm not going to have this done today." And I was like, "No, this is due today. Like and she was like, "Yeah, but I have to get home." And I'm like, "No." From that point on, I have always been very clear that, hey, you know what? If you're going to miss the date, just let me know that you're going to miss it and you need assistance before it's actually due. Because that's where the trust comes from, right? Is over time, trust is being able to count on people and being able to know how they're going to behave in certain situations. So that created a really hard time for me to delegate from that point on. So I think these are all great action items. We're going to wrap up, and I'm going to ask for final thoughts. But before we do that, I do want to let the people in our audience know we're going to be coming back in a couple of weeks. We're going to take a couple of weeks off. Hopefully everyone has heard that IASA 2020 has gone virtual. The IASA Exchange is taking place June 8th and 9th. And with everything that we at the IASA staff and management team need to do between now and that conference, we're going to be a little bit busy. So we are going to, let me just first, Kerry, is there anything you'd like to share about the event? I'm very excited about it and with the new format.
We are too. We're thrilled to be able to bring this opportunity to our community and make sure that we're still able to share our knowledge and share resources with the community in this time, and making sure that we're there for them. So we're excited about that. We're looking forward to a wonderful program. Our education committees are hard at work in paring down the content that we had from the live event into virtual and making sure that they're going to be appropriate for a virtual setting. So we're excited, and more to come on it.
That's great. It sounds like it's going to be amazing. We are going to come back after that, but before we close out this session, why don't we do final thoughts on delegation and trust? Why don't we start with you, Kerry?
I think the first thing that I would think of is look inside yourself. If you're having trouble delegating, it's clearly an issue that is within you, and it might have to do strongly with trust issues that you might have, in your history. So sort of take a hard look at yourself and be able to openly say, what's the worst thing that's going to happen if I delegate a small project? It doesn't have to be the biggest thing on my desk right now to start with. Start small if it's a challenging thing for you, with a small task to somebody, and see how they do, and then reinforce that positively when it's done well. I think that's one thing we have to just look to in ourselves.
Great. Cathy?
So I think what I would say is that what we're going from is not really delegation. We're not abdicating. We're not delegating, really. What we're doing, if we do it well, we're empowering people to be the best that they can be. And when you trust people and when you communicate, you can actually do more. And as a leader, you can take on more. Your people are going to feel a lot better about what they're doing. They're going to be motivated. They're going to feel needed, and they're going to be happier. And right now, people have a strong need to be connected, to be part of something. So if you really want to make the best of all of this stuff that we're going through right now, give your people a chance to bring out the best in them, and give yourself a chance to be a real leader.
It's great advice. Well, thank you for joining us yet again. As I said earlier, we're going to take a short break, just a couple weeks. And when we return, all of these sessions around COVID-19 and managing in a remote environment have been building towards probably the most important topics we're going to be covering, which are equity and fairness and how to manage performance. And as we start to look at mid-year performance reviews, I think the timing will be perfect. We'll be back in mid-June with our 7th episode on equity, ensuring perceived fairness. If you'd like to ask any questions about that topic or any additional questions about this topic, please leave a comment on our YouTube page or email info@iasa.org or tweet at us. We look forward to hearing from you, and we'll see you again in just a couple weeks.